It wasn't God who answered our prayer. It was when I saw humans emerge from the fog. The world had grown quiet in the wrong way. It wasn't the soft calm of peace, but the heavy stillness of something lost. Cities once full of life lay in ruins, their streets cracked and empty, buildings half collapsed into dust and rust. Smoke still drifted from fires that had long since died down, leaving a faint, acrid scent in the air. The sky was a dull gray, and the sun struggled through a haze of clouds and ash. For those who survived, every day was a struggle, and hope felt like a fragile flame about to be extinguished. In the heart of this world, on a plateau surrounded by jagged mountains, a small group of survivors had gathered. They were the last of their kind, a proud race that had once ruled over thriving cities, but now barely managed to cling to life. Their leaders had tried everything: technology, diplomacy, even ancient rituals that were thought to call upon higher powers. None had worked. Their enemies were relentless, numerous, and unyielding. On this day, the survivors huddled inside what remained of a temple. Its great doors had been shattered, but the walls still held. Dust fell from the ceiling like slow rain, and the air was thick with tension. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of movement through the ruined streets, a constant reminder that the enemy could arrive at any moment. The temple's main hall had become a place of final hope. The elders, their faces lined with years of fear and grief, stood in a circle. Their voices rose in a chant that had been taught for generations. It was not just a prayer, it was a ritual of desperation. Each word carried a weight that seemed to press down on the room, heavy and suffocating. The survivors joined in, their voices trembling, some silently, some aloud. They had long since stopped believing that anyone or anything was listening. Yet still they prayed. Among them was Leora, a young scout who had survived more than she ever thought possible. She had seen death in many forms, and she had learned to move quietly, to hide, and to fight when needed. But today, even she felt a strange sense of unease. Her eyes scanned the cracked walls of the temple, noting the shadows that moved with the flickering light. Something about the wind outside was different. There was a stillness in it that did not belong to this world. The chanting grew louder, louder than it had ever been. Leora could feel it vibrating through the floor, into her bones. She closed her eyes, wishing for a miracle, wishing for someone, something to answer their prayers. But deep down, she knew that the gods they had prayed to for centuries had abandoned them. She had seen it too many times. They had prayed for protection, for guidance, for a savior, and the silence had always been absolute. Then it happened. A sound came from outside the temple, soft at first, almost imperceptible. A rustling, like the movement of something large through the fog that hung over the ruins. The chanting faltered for a moment, then resumed as if trying to ignore it. But Leora could feel the hairs on her arms rising. She stepped closer to the doorway, peering into the gray haze. At first she saw nothing. The fog was thick, curling around the broken buildings like a living thing. But then shapes began to emerge. They were moving steadily, deliberately, and they were not like anything Leora had ever seen. They were upright, walking with confidence, carrying equipment that seemed strangely simple but highly efficient. Their armor was unlike any the survivors had encountered, light yet protective, and their weapons seemed designed more for precision than for destruction. Most shocking of all, there was a sense of purpose in their movement. They did not panic. They did not hesitate. They advanced as if they belonged to the world, even though the world had nearly forgotten them. The elders stopped chanting. The room was filled with a stunned silence. No one spoke. They simply watched as the figures moved closer, their presence overwhelming the senses without a sound. Leora felt her heart pounding in her chest. She had been trained to recognize threats, to anticipate attacks, to survive in impossible situations. But this was different. There was no malice here, no hunger for destruction. Yet there was power, undeniable power, in the calm determination of these beings. One of the figures raised a hand, not in aggression but in acknowledgement. It was a simple gesture, but it carried weight. The fog began to swirl around them, parting just enough to reveal their faces. They were human. Leora could hardly believe it. Humans had not been seen in this part of the galaxy for centuries. Stories about them existed, passed down through generations, but no one had ever truly believed they were real. And yet, here they were, walking out of the fog as if summoned by fate itself. The room filled with whispered questions. How had they survived? Why were they here? Did they come to fight or to save? Leora could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. The elders looked to each other, uncertain, afraid to hope. And then one of the humans stepped forward, speaking in a language that was familiar yet strange to the survivors. The words were simple, direct, without ceremony or reverence. "We are here to help," the human said. It was not a miracle. It was not divine intervention. It was a choice, a decision made by beings who had the power to ignore suffering but chose not to. And in that choice, there was something far more powerful than any prayer could summon. Leora stepped forward, her body trembling. She had expected gods to answer, angels to descend, some supernatural force to intervene. But what she saw was human determination. Humans did not need to be worshipped. They did not need prayers. They acted because they could, because it was right, because it was necessary. And in that realization, hope began to take root again, fragile but undeniable. Outside, the fog continued to roll over the broken city. The humans advanced steadily, forming lines, assessing the terrain, and preparing for whatever came next. They moved with precision and coordination, quickly establishing positions that could hold against even the strongest enemies. Leora watched them, amazed. Each action was calculated, yet fluid, adapting to the environment with ease. She realized that they were not just fighting for survival, they were rewriting the rules of survival itself. The enemy, sensing the sudden appearance of these newcomers, hesitated. They had expected the survivors to crumble, to surrender, to be destroyed by their overwhelming force. But now, with the humans in their path, everything changed. The enemy advanced cautiously, unsure of what they were facing. The humans met them without fear, without hesitation, and the first shots rang out, precise and controlled. Leora's eyes widened as she saw the effectiveness of their actions. The humans were not gods, but they moved with an almost unnatural skill. They anticipated attacks, countered strategies, and adapted instantly to new threats. And yet, they did not kill recklessly. They fought to protect, to defend, to preserve life wherever possible. Every move was deliberate, measured, and humane. Inside the temple, the survivors began to gather their courage. For the first time in years, they felt a sense of purpose returning. The prayers had not summoned the humans. They had done that themselves. But in seeing them, in witnessing their choices and their actions, the survivors found a spark of belief, not in gods, not in miracles, but in the strength of living beings who refused to give up. The fog began to thin as the humans advanced deeper into the city. Leora followed their movements closely, noting how they communicated silently, how they adjusted to every obstacle. It was not magic. It was skill, experience, and unwavering determination. She realized that the stories of divine intervention had always misunderstood the truth. It had never been about gods answering prayers. It had always been about beings choosing to act when all hope seemed lost. As the first battle lines were drawn, Leora felt a strange calm settle over her. The world was not safe. The enemy was still strong. But for the first time, she believed that survival was possible. Not because a miracle had occurred, but because humans had chosen to step forward to face the impossible and to fight, not for glory, not for worship, but for life itself. And in that choice, she saw the answer to the prayers that had gone unanswered for generations. It was God who had come. It was humanity. The fog began to slowly drift away, revealing more of the ruined city. Leora stepped cautiously out of the temple, her eyes scanning the streets. The humans moved with quiet purpose, their steps coordinated, almost like a dance of precision and discipline. Their presence was unlike anything she had ever witnessed, calm, deliberate, and terrifyingly effective. The survivors had expected saviors in the form of gods or mythical beings, yet what they saw now was different. Humans did not glow. They did not have magical symbols or wings or divine weapons. They carried themselves with confidence and skill. Every move seemed intentional. Every glance counted. There was no arrogance in them, no demand for worship, only a focus on the task at hand, protecting the innocent and confronting the enemy. Leora observed one human kneel beside a wounded child. With gentle hands, they assessed the child's injuries, then pulled out a small device that sealed the wound without pain. The child's eyes widened in amazement, but the human spoke no words of comfort. They simply worked, efficient and quiet, before rising again and moving forward. It was the simplicity of their action that struck Leora. They did not perform miracles. They acted. That was enough. The enemy had begun to regroup, cautiously advancing into the city's center. Leora could see their confusion. They had expected an easy conquest, the survivors cowering or surrendering. Instead, they found humans, organized, disciplined, and fully aware of their presence. Every human seemed to anticipate the enemy's moves, positioning themselves to block attacks or create advantages where none existed. One group of humans moved to a collapsed bridge, examining the broken metal and stone. With swift hands, they attached devices that lifted heavy sections and repaired the pathway in minutes. Leora could barely comprehend the speed and ingenuity of their work. It was not magic. It was knowledge, skill, and determination. The survivors who watched felt a spark of awe, something they hadn't felt for decades. The humans didn't speak much to the survivors, but their eyes conveyed understanding. When one of the survivors pointed toward a narrow alley where enemies were advancing, a human nodded slightly and moved with precision to intercept them. There was no hesitation, no panic, only movement driven by thought and instinct. Leora realized something important. Humans acted because they wanted to, not because they were commanded by a higher power. That was a lesson she had never learned in her long years of survival. As the battle unfolded, humans displayed an adaptability that astonished Leora. When an enemy vehicle appeared, humans quickly assessed its weaknesses. They used debris from collapsed buildings, creating barriers and traps. One human sprinted toward the vehicle with a small device, attaching it and sending a pulse that disabled the engine instantly. The enemy was caught off guard, retreating as the humans pressed forward with calm precision. The survivors could not help but notice the contrast. Their own people had spent years relying on rituals, on tradition, on outdated strategies that had failed them time and again. Humans relied on thinking, on observation, on action. They did not hesitate and they did not falter. Every human was aware not just of their own role, but of the whole battlefield, predicting moves and adjusting in real time. Leora felt a mixture of fear and admiration. She had survived countless dangers, yet this was unlike anything she had faced. Humans were not just strong, they were clever, creative, and relentless. They seemed to embody a combination of intelligence and courage that no enemy could match. And they did not fight for glory or worship. They fought because it was right. That realization struck her deeply. In the center of the city, the enemy tried to regroup, bringing forward massive machines designed to crush any resistance. Humans anticipated this. A team moved quickly, deploying devices that disrupted the machine's power sources. Others flanked from unexpected angles, forcing the enemy to retreat under precise, coordinated attacks. The survivors watched in disbelief. They had seen armies fall, cities burn, and their people scatter, but these humans refused to falter. One human, who seemed to be a leader, moved toward the most dangerous enemy machine. With calm determination, they assessed its structure, then set a device that neutralized its weapon systems. The machine fell silent, useless, and the enemy hesitated, unsure how to respond. Leora realized that humans did not rely on brute strength alone. They used intelligence, speed, and ingenuity to turn even hopeless situations into opportunities. The survivors began to follow the humans cautiously. They moved as a group, learning from observation. Every time a human acted, the survivors noticed small techniques. The way they scanned their surroundings, the way they communicated silently with gestures, the way they adapted to every obstacle. It was like watching a new form of life, one that seemed impossible to resist or predict. Hours passed, and the humans never tired. They coordinated rescues, rebuilt broken defenses, and fought without pause. Leora saw a small group trapped in a collapsed building. Without hesitation, humans used tools to lift heavy rubble, creating a safe path for the trapped survivors. No one hesitated. No one questioned the danger. They simply acted, and the survivors learned that action was stronger than prayer. Leora found herself running alongside one human who helped her clear debris. He did not speak more than a few words, but his presence was enough. The simple fact that someone strong, skilled, and determined was there gave her courage she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, she believed survival was possible. As night fell, the fog began to return, thicker than before. But humans did not stop. They moved with night vision equipment, carefully scanning the shadows, anticipating attacks before they happened. Leora realized the humans were not just warriors. They were problem solvers, engineers, medics, and leaders all in one. They were prepared for everything, and yet adaptable enough to handle the unexpected. The survivors began to understand the human approach. They did not rely on miracles, on luck, or on prayers. They relied on choice, intelligence, and determination. That was the most terrifying part for the enemy and the most inspiring part for Leora. Humans could not be predicted, controlled, or ignored. They acted with purpose, and that purpose was enough to change the tide of battle. By dawn, the humans had secured a large portion of the city. Enemy forces were scattered, confused, and retreating. The survivors dared to hope, watching as the humans organized defenses and prepared for further threats. They were still strangers, yet their presence brought a sense of unity and possibility. Leora felt a warmth she had not experienced in years, the feeling of safety, however fragile, and the knowledge that help could come from beings who chose to act without hesitation. Leora watched one human as he helped rebuild a damaged communication tower. The structure was old, twisted, and rusted, but he worked methodically, repairing circuits and realigning components. She realized that humans did not just fight, they created, repaired, and improved. They turned chaos into order not through magic or prayer, but through skill and thought. That was the lesson she would carry with her. Survival depended on action, not hope. The fog lifted enough for Leora to see other parts of the city. Broken buildings, deserted streets, and scattered debris still told the story of years of war and neglect. Yet the humans moved through it with purpose, showing that even the most hopeless situations could be addressed with intelligence and determination. Every human action became a lesson, a demonstration of what could be achieved when fear was met with courage and thought. By midday, the humans had rescued hundreds of survivors. They had fought off enemy patrols, repaired key infrastructure, and secured vital resources. Leora found herself amazed not just by their strength, but by their humanity. They cared for others, acted for the greater good, and adapted quickly to every challenge. It was the very definition of resilience. That evening, as the city quieted, Leora and the other survivors gathered to watch the humans. They were not celebrating a miracle. They were simply witnessing beings who chose to act in the face of overwhelming odds. Leora felt a shift within herself, a realization that would change everything. Humans did not need faith or worship to make a difference. Their power came from choice, intelligence, and unwavering determination. For the first time, Leora allowed herself to imagine a future beyond survival. The humans had arrived not because of prayers, not because of destiny, but because they had chosen to step into the fog and act. That choice had changed everything. And in that realization, she understood the truth. Survival was not a gift to be prayed for. It was something to be fought for, achieved through courage, skill, and determination. The city was far from safe, and the enemy was still out there. But for the first time, the survivors had hope. And it was not a fragile hope based on gods or miracles. It was a living, breathing hope based on humans, beings who acted when it mattered most, and whose determination could not be ignored. Leora looked at the humans moving through the streets, calm, focused, and unwavering. She understood that this was the beginning of something new. The survivors had been saved not by divine intervention, but by the choice of beings who refused to stand by while others suffered. That was the lesson she would carry forward and the story she would tell, not of miracles, but of action, courage, and the extraordinary power of humanity itself. And as the sun rose over the broken city, casting golden light over the fog and ruins, Leora felt the first spark of real hope in years. Humans had come, not as gods, but as saviors of the living world, saviors who acted because they could, and in doing so, showed the survivors that the future was not yet lost. The morning air was crisp, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke and dust from the battle of the previous day. The fog had lifted almost entirely, revealing the full extent of the ruined city. Leora stood at the edge of the temple's steps, observing the humans as they moved with quiet purpose. They were no longer just strangers. They were leaders, protectors, and problem solvers. Every step they took seemed deliberate, every decision precise. The enemy had not vanished entirely. Small groups still lurked in the shadows, attempting to regroup and strike at weak points, but the humans anticipated each move. Leora watched as one team scanned the streets with compact devices that projected maps and enemy locations. They shared information silently, through gestures and small nods. Coordination flowed naturally, as if each human instinctively knew the next step. A sudden alarm rang out from the communication hub that had been repaired overnight. Leora and the other survivors hurried over, watching the humans analyze the data quickly. The enemy was moving toward the western district, where the tallest buildings still stood. Those buildings offered a strategic advantage, both for observation and for defense. Humans began to organize a response immediately. Some ran to the rooftops, setting up observation posts and defensive equipment. Others moved through the streets, clearing debris and creating barricades to slow down the approaching enemy forces. Leora noticed that the humans were not just reacting, they were planning ahead. They studied the streets, calculating where the enemy might strike next, predicting weaknesses and preparing solutions before problems even arose. Unlike her own people, who often relied on old strategies and superstitions, humans relied on intelligence, observation, and adaptability. They did not hesitate, and they did not falter. A small group of survivors had gathered near her, whispering in awe. "How do they do this?" one asked. "It's like they know everything before it happens." Leora shook her head. "It's not magic, it's choice. They decide to act, and that decision makes them unstoppable." The enemy's first attack came swiftly. A squad of armored vehicles advanced down a wide street, aiming to break through the barricades. Humans responded instantly. Teams had already positioned themselves along the rooftops, targeting weak points in the vehicle's armor. Others had prepared traps along the street, hidden wires, weighted debris, and small devices that emitted electromagnetic pulses. As the vehicles approached, the humans triggered the devices. Engines sputtered and died, tires locked, and some vehicles came to a sudden halt, spinning out of control. The enemy soldiers jumped out, attempting to regroup, but the humans had anticipated this. They moved quickly, surrounding the attackers and disarming them without unnecessary violence. It was a display of precision, intelligence, and control. Leora watched in amazement as the humans worked together, each understanding their role in the greater plan, each action reinforcing the next. In the middle of the street, a human leader assessed the situation. Without hesitation, they signaled to a nearby group of survivors, instructing them to move civilians to safe zones. Leora joined them, guiding frightened children and elders through narrow alleys toward makeshift shelters. She marveled at the humans' efficiency. There was no panic, no chaos, just a clear plan and the calm execution of it. Hours passed as skirmishes continued across the city. The humans moved from street to street, anticipating attacks, neutralizing threats, and rescuing trapped survivors. Leora began to notice patterns in their behavior. They worked in teams, each member aware of the other's actions. They communicated silently whenever possible, conserving energy and maintaining focus. And always, their priority was protecting life. Killing the enemy was secondary. At one point, a group of enemy soldiers attempted to ambush a human team from the top of a half-collapsed building. Leora held her breath, expecting chaos, but the humans reacted instantly. One set up a small device that stabilized the building's structure temporarily, preventing it from collapsing. Another used a non-lethal projectile to disarm the attackers, forcing them to retreat. Within minutes, the threat was neutralized, and the humans moved on without delay. Leora realized something important. Humans did not rely on brute force alone. They relied on problem-solving, creativity, and adaptability. They turned the environment to their advantage, used technology intelligently, and coordinated their actions flawlessly. Where other species might panic or rely on tradition, humans innovated, adapted, and acted decisively. By midday, the Western District was secure. The humans had not only defended the area but had improved it, creating barriers, observation posts, and safe zones for survivors. Leora walked alongside one human who was checking a damaged building. He handed her a small tool and gestured for her to assist. Hesitant at first, she followed instructions, carefully repairing a support beam. The human offered no praise, no criticism, simply guidance and silent support. Leora felt a sense of purpose she had not felt in years. As she worked, she watched the humans around her. One was guiding a group of survivors in rebuilding a water supply system. Another was analyzing maps, planning routes to secure other parts of the city. Every action was intentional, every decision part of a larger strategy. Leora understood that humans did not rely on luck or divine intervention. They relied on thinking, adapting, and taking action. That was their strength, and it was almost overwhelming to witness. The afternoon brought another challenge. Enemy reinforcements arrived, attempting to retake the central plaza. Humans reacted instantly. Observation teams had already noted the incoming forces, and strategic positions had been established. Humans used the environment to their advantage, funneling the enemy into narrow streets where traps had been set. When the enemy realized they were being outmaneuvered, they tried to break formation, but the humans adapted, adjusting positions and redirecting attacks with precision. Leora watched in amazement as one human confronted an enemy leader directly. The human did not attack recklessly. Instead, they used speed and agility to disable the leader's weapon, forcing him to surrender. No unnecessary violence, no rage, just intelligence, skill, and control. It was not divine power, but it was something just as compelling. It was the power of choice, knowledge, and determination. By evening, the city was largely secure. The humans had repelled multiple attacks, saved countless survivors, and reorganized key areas to prevent further threats. Leora and the other survivors gathered to observe the humans' work. She noticed how each human seemed to understand not just their role, but the entire operation. Their ability to adapt, communicate, and act decisively created a sense of order in chaos. One human approached Leora and gestured for her to follow. They led her to a vantage point overlooking the city. From there, she could see the humans coordinating supply lines, reinforcing defenses, and establishing safe zones. It was a sight that inspired awe. They were not gods, and they did not demand worship. They acted because they chose to, and their actions changed the course of survival for an entire civilization. Leora began to understand the lesson humans were teaching without words. It was not enough to pray, to hope, or to wait for miracles. Survival required action, intelligence, and cooperation. Humans embodied these qualities in a way that was both extraordinary and humbling. Their presence had transformed fear into courage, chaos into strategy, and despair into hope. As night fell, the city was quiet once more. Humans continued to patrol, check equipment, and ensure that all survivors were safe. Leora walked among them, noticing the small details, the way they shared food, assisted the elderly, and repaired damaged infrastructure. Every action was deliberate, yet compassionate. Humans were not perfect, but their determination and skill made them nearly unstoppable. Leora realized that this was the turning point. The enemy had underestimated the humans, assuming fear and weakness would make the city easy prey. Instead, humans had turned the tide. They had protected the innocent, neutralized threats, and established order where there had been none. And they had done it without magic, without divine power, simply through choice, courage, and intelligence. The survivors began to feel a sense of unity. They had watched humans act with precision and compassion, and in doing so, had learned the value of planning, coordination, and adaptation. Leora felt a quiet determination growing within her. She had survived by hiding, by fleeing, and by avoiding danger. But now she understood that survival was more than that. It was about action, about making decisions that mattered, and about standing firm even when the odds seemed impossible. By the end of the night, humans had secured key parts of the city and set up a network of defenses. Leora watched as they gathered with survivors, quietly organizing teams, assigning tasks, and planning for the challenges ahead. There were no speeches, no grand proclamations, no divine rituals. There was only purpose, action, and determination. Leora understood that this was not just a battle for survival, it was a lesson in what it meant to be human. These beings had shown that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Strength was not simply physical, but intellectual, strategic, and moral. And hope was not a gift from gods, but the result of deliberate action and unwavering determination. As she looked at the humans moving through the streets, Leora felt a deep sense of respect and admiration. They had arrived from the fog not to be worshipped, not to perform miracles, but to act when it mattered most. Their choices had saved countless lives and had taught a lesson more valuable than any prayer. That action, intelligence, and courage could change the course of history. For the first time, Leora believed that the city could survive, not because of divine intervention, but because humans had chosen to step forward to fight and to protect. Their presence was a reminder that survival depended on those willing to act, to think, and to adapt. And in that realization, hope burned brighter than it had in decades. The city had settled into an uneasy quiet. Broken buildings, shattered streets, and scattered debris still told the story of long years of war and neglect. Yet for the first time in decades, there was movement that felt purposeful and strong. Humans moved through the city with a calm confidence, their steps measured and precise. Leora watched from the edge of the plaza, feeling a mix of awe and curiosity. She had seen what humans could do in battle, but now she wondered why they had come. She followed a small group of humans as they moved toward the remnants of an old communications tower. Their actions were deliberate. Each carried tools and equipment, not weapons alone. Leora noticed how they coordinated silently, gestures conveying instructions that seemed to be understood instantly. They had already secured the surrounding streets, and now their attention was on restoring a network that could connect the city with the wider world. Leora approached one of the humans cautiously. "Why are you here?" she asked quietly. Her voice trembled slightly, not with fear but with the hope of an answer. The human paused for a moment, then looked at her. Their eyes were calm and focused. "We received a signal," they said simply. "A weak distress call, barely noticeable. We tracked it. We came to see if anyone survived." Leora felt a shiver run down her spine. All this time the survivors had believed that no one cared, that the world had abandoned them. They had prayed for gods to intervene, for miracles that never came. And yet, these humans had come because someone had chosen to act. Not out of duty, not because of prophecy, not because of a promise, but because a faint signal indicated that life might still exist here. That simple choice had brought them into the fog and changed everything. She followed the humans as they worked on the tower. Their teamwork was flawless. One climbed the structure, repairing damaged wiring, while another stabilized the supports below. They communicated in short, simple words, supplemented with gestures and signals. The tower gradually came back to life, lights flickering as communication channels opened. Soon they began sending messages to nearby allies, informing them of the city's situation and requesting supplies. Leora realized that humans didn't just fight. They planned, they solved problems, and they rebuilt. The day was long, and the humans worked tirelessly. Some distributed food and water to survivors, organizing lines with efficiency and fairness. Others cleared streets of debris, restoring access for those who needed to move quickly. A small medical team set up a makeshift clinic in a partially intact building, treating injuries with a mix of knowledge and ingenuity. Leora watched as a human applied a portable device to a broken limb. The device stabilized the bone and reduced pain instantly, without complex procedures. It was simple, practical, and effective, the very essence of human problem-solving. As the day progressed, Leora began to observe the humans' approach to strategy. They did not rush blindly into danger. They assessed, calculated, and adapted. When a group of enemy scouts was spotted in the distance, humans did not immediately attack. Instead, they analyzed the terrain, noting cover, escape routes, and the number of enemy forces. They positioned themselves to intercept efficiently, minimizing risk to both themselves and the survivors. Leora followed a human leader as they moved through the city, guiding teams and giving silent instructions. She noticed how every human was aware not only of their own task, but of the entire operation. They understood how each action connected to the larger plan. A team clearing debris communicated silently with the medical unit, ensuring that no injured survivors were left behind. Another team reinforced barricades, anticipating potential ambush points. Leora realized that this level of coordination was impossible without trust, training, and intelligence, and humans had all three in abundance. By evening, the Western District was not only secure but thriving under the humans' guidance. Survivors began to move more freely, working alongside the humans in small tasks. Leora assisted in clearing rubble, guided by one of the humans who showed her efficient ways to lift debris without injury. She marveled at how humans taught by example rather than command. They did not demand obedience. They inspired action through skill and calm authority. The humans gathered the survivors in the central plaza as night fell. Fires burned in controlled pits, casting warm light over the ruins. Leora noticed that there were no speeches, no proclamations of heroism. Humans did not seek praise or gratitude. They were simply organizing, planning, and preparing. Yet their presence alone gave the survivors courage. Hope, fragile and tentative, began to take root in hearts long hardened by fear. A human leader stepped forward to address a small group, including Leora. Their voice was calm but firm. "You survived this long because you adapted," they said. "Now we will help you survive what comes next, but you must also act. Protection is not only ours, it is everyone's responsibility. Learn, observe, and help where you can." The words were simple yet powerful. Leora realized that humans believed in action over miracles. They did not claim to be gods, nor did they demand worship. Their power came from their choice to act, their intelligence, and their unwavering determination. It was a lesson that the survivors needed more than anything. Survival depended on action, not prayers. During the night, humans continued their patrols and repairs. Leora observed a team repairing water lines that had been broken for decades. They worked quietly, using simple tools and knowledge, restoring access to clean water for hundreds of survivors. Another group set up defenses along likely enemy routes, using traps, barricades, and strategic positioning. Every move was purposeful, every task contributing to the greater goal of survival. Leora found herself reflecting on the contrast between humans and the previous leaders of her own people. Her leaders had relied on rituals, on tradition, and on divine favor. They had waited for miracles that never came. Humans, however, relied on skill, intelligence, and the choice to act. They did not hesitate. They did not falter. And in that difference lay the key to survival. As the night deepened, humans gathered near the edge of the city to observe distant enemy movements. Leora watched them as they analyzed patterns, identified weak points, and devised strategies for upcoming confrontations. They worked with a calm efficiency, never wasting energy or focus. It was not a display of power. It was a demonstration of intelligence applied with courage. The humans' presence had begun to change the survivors as well. Leora noticed people moving more confidently, following instructions, and learning to act rather than wait. Children were taught how to assist safely in small tasks, adults coordinated supply lines, and even those who had long given up found renewed purpose. Humans were teaching not through words alone, but through example, showing that every action mattered. As dawn approached, Leora stood atop a partially repaired building overlooking the city. She saw humans coordinating teams, distributing resources, and preparing defenses for the day ahead. The enemy was still out there, hidden in the outskirts, but humans had anticipated their moves. They had studied the terrain, understood the enemy's likely strategies, and adapted their own. Every action was deliberate, intelligent, and coordinated. Leora understood something profound in that moment. The humans had come not because of divine intervention, not because of fate, and not because they were promised victory. They had come because a signal had indicated that life might still exist here. They had chosen to act, to intervene, and to protect. That choice had brought hope to a world that had long since forgotten it. She watched a human assist a wounded survivor, applying a device that stabilized injuries quickly and painlessly. Another human helped restore electricity to a damaged building, carefully reconnecting circuits and testing systems. Every act was practical, efficient, and focused on preserving life. Humans did not act out of pride or glory. They acted because it was necessary, because it was right, and because they could. By mid-morning, the humans had established a network of safe zones and supply lines throughout the city. Survivors were organized into teams to assist in rebuilding, each guided by humans who provided instruction without force. Leora joined a group working on repairing an old bridge, learning techniques to reinforce structures using limited resources. She realized that humans did not just fight, they empowered others, teaching them skills to survive and adapt. Throughout the day, the humans continued to neutralize enemy threats as they arose. Skirmishes were handled with precision, minimizing casualties and preventing panic. Leora observed how they communicated silently, coordinated movements, and adapted strategies in real time. Humans did not rely on luck or miracles. They relied on intelligence, observation, and the choice to act decisively. By evening, the city was functioning more like a community than a battlefield. Survivors moved confidently, carrying out tasks, assisting each other, and learning from humans. Leora reflected on the lessons she had observed. Courage was not the absence of fear, strength was not just physical, and hope was not something to be prayed for. It was created through action, intelligence, and determination. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the city, Leora realized that the humans' arrival had done more than save lives. They had taught a new way of thinking. They had shown that survival was not a passive act but an active one. Every choice mattered. Every action mattered. And through their example, the survivors learned that they too could take control of their destiny. Humans moved through the city one last time that night, checking defenses, assisting the vulnerable, and preparing for the next challenges. Leora watched them, understanding that their power lay not in weapons or technology alone, but in their ability to act when others could not. It was a lesson in courage, intelligence, and determination, the very essence of what made humanity extraordinary. And as the city finally rested under the stars, a quiet truth settled in Leora's heart. The humans had come not as gods, not as miracle workers, but as beings who chose to act when it mattered most. Their presence had restored hope, taught the survivors valuable skills, and shown that action, intelligence, and courage could change the course of a civilization. For the first time in years, Leora believed that the city could survive. Not because of prayers or miracles, but because humans had chosen to step forward to act and to teach others to do the same. That choice, that determination, and that courage would carry the survivors into a future they had once thought impossible. The city had slowly begun to awaken under the guidance of the humans. Survivors moved through the streets with purpose, rebuilding homes, clearing debris, and assisting one another. The humans walked among them quietly, observing, teaching, and guiding, but never demanding recognition. Their presence alone had transformed fear into confidence, hopelessness into determination. Leora walked beside a human engineer as they repaired a collapsed bridge. She had learned quickly, absorbing every technique, every gesture, every method of problem-solving. By mid-morning, the humans called a meeting in the central plaza. Survivors gathered, curiosity and cautious hope written on their faces. Leora stood with the others, noticing how humans did not address them as inferior or as children to be instructed. They spoke simply, calmly, and clearly, laying out plans for defense, supplies, and rebuilding. Every word carried weight because it was backed by action. The human leader explained their approach. We did not come because we expected victory, nor because we were told to intervene. We came because someone might still be alive. That choice, our choice, was more important than any odds, any enemy, or any prophecy. Survival depends on action. It depends on courage, intelligence, and determination, not miracles. Leora listened, feeling a warmth in her chest she had not known in years. The humans were right. The prayers, the rituals, the endless hopes, they had never changed the course of their survival. Action did. Choice did. And now humans had shown that possibility. In the following days, humans continued their work tirelessly. They organized teams, not just of themselves but of survivors, teaching them to think strategically. They demonstrated how to anticipate enemy movements, how to strengthen defenses, and how to make use of every available resource. Leora noticed a change in her people. Fear had not vanished, but it had lessened. Confidence replaced hesitation. The survivors were no longer passive participants. They were becoming capable contributors. Humans did not stop at immediate needs. They began repairing long-neglected infrastructure, water pipelines, power lines, and communication systems. Each repair was done methodically, with survivors assisting wherever possible. Leora helped restore a water pump alongside a young human technician. The device was simple, yet effective, stabilizing the pump and allowing clean water to flow once more. She felt pride swell inside her, not in herself alone, but in the collaboration in the shared effort. At night, humans patrolled the outskirts of the city. Enemy forces were scattered but still dangerous. Leora followed a group to observe. The humans moved with a quiet alertness, scanning, analyzing, and preparing. When a small enemy team tried to ambush them, humans did not panic. They used the environment, manipulated terrain, and disarmed the attackers without unnecessary violence. Every action demonstrated intelligence and adaptability. Leora realized that humans had a deeper philosophy: protect life wherever possible, fight only when necessary, and always think ahead. Days passed, and the survivors became more capable. They built simple tools, strengthened barricades, and learned emergency procedures. Humans taught them not by giving orders, but by showing methods and guiding them through mistakes. Leora observed a group of young survivors who were initially terrified of enemy patrols. Humans led them through practice exercises, teaching them how to observe silently, move strategically, and communicate without words. By the end of the week, those same children moved confidently, their fear replaced by focus. One evening, Leora joined the human leader in a quiet part of the city. "Why do you help us?" she asked. "There are countless worlds out there in danger. Why ours?" The human leader looked at her calmly. "We cannot save every world," they said. "But we can act when we know life is at stake. That is what matters. We do not intervene for worship, for glory, or for miracles. We intervene because someone might survive if we do. That is enough." The simplicity of their answer struck Leora deeply. Survival was never about divine intervention. It was about those who chose to act, those willing to risk everything for others, those who refused to ignore suffering. Humans embodied that philosophy. It was not magic, nor destiny, nor prophecy. It was choice. Weeks passed and the city transformed. Survivors repaired homes, cleared streets, and re-established trade routes. Humans continued to guide, their presence a constant, calm reassurance. Leora helped organize teams for long-term planning. She noticed that humans were not just fixing immediate problems. They were teaching the survivors to be independent, capable, and prepared. The skills humans imparted were more valuable than any weapon or artifact: observation, adaptation, strategy, and cooperation. One morning, distant sounds of enemy forces approaching reached the city. Leora and the survivors tensed, but humans acted immediately. They did not panic, did not overreact. Teams were positioned strategically, barricades were reinforced, and plans were explained quickly and simply. The humans' preparation turned fear into action. When the enemy arrived, they found themselves outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and unable to gain any advantage. Leora observed the humans as they coordinated with each other silently. Each person moved in perfect harmony with the next, anticipating actions and adjusting plans dynamically. The enemy was pushed back without excessive force. Casualties were minimal and every survivor remained safe. Leora felt a mixture of relief and admiration. Humans did not just fight, they solved problems, protected life, and taught others to do the same. After the skirmish, humans gathered survivors to discuss lessons learned. They encouraged reflection, analysis, and improvements in strategy. Leora saw that humans valued learning from experience as much as action itself. They taught that intelligence and adaptability were just as important as strength, and that courage was defined not by fearlessness, but by the willingness to act despite fear. Over the next few days, humans revealed more of their purpose. They had not come randomly. Long ago, a distress signal had been sent from the city, weak and almost undetectable. Humans had tracked it, debated the risks, and chosen to intervene. They did not know the outcome, they did not expect gratitude, and they did not require worship. Their mission was simple: protect life when possible. That philosophy resonated deeply with Leora. Humans did not wait for miracles, they created them through action. As the city stabilized, Leora noticed something remarkable. Survivors were no longer just dependent on the humans. They acted, learned, and contributed actively. Skills previously unknown were being mastered. Communication improved. Defense systems were maintained without constant supervision. The humans had empowered others to survive, ensuring that their influence would last long after they departed. One evening, humans gathered near the edge of the city to prepare for departure. Leora approached the leader. "Will you stay?" she asked. "We still need you." The human leader shook their head. "We cannot be everywhere at once," they said. "Our choice to act brought hope here, but now it is yours to maintain. You have learned, you have adapted, and you have survived. That is enough." The humans left quietly, moving back into the fog from which they had emerged. Leora and the survivors watched silently as the figures disappeared, leaving behind a city transformed, not by miracles, but by action, determination, and intelligence. The lessons humans had taught were now part of the survivors' lives. They understood that survival required courage, foresight, and cooperation. They knew that hope was not something given, it was something earned through effort. In the weeks and months that followed, the city thrived. Survivors rebuilt their homes, restored trade, and organized defenses. They continued to teach the methods humans had demonstrated: problem-solving, observation, adaptation, and teamwork. Stories spread of the humans who had emerged from the fog, not as gods, but as beings who chose to act when it mattered most. Leora told her children the same story, not of miracles, but of courage, intelligence, and choice. And in her heart, she understood the true meaning of what had happened. It had never been about divine intervention. It had always been about those willing to act, willing to risk, and willing to teach others to survive. Humans had not saved the city through magic or power. They had saved it through action, skill, and determination. That lesson would endure for generations. The city became a symbol of resilience. Survivors carried the memory of the humans' arrival not as a tale of worship, but as a story of empowerment. They remembered how fear had been turned into courage, chaos into strategy, and despair into hope. They knew that when action replaced waiting, when intelligence replaced superstition, and when courage replaced fear, even the impossible could be achieved. Leora stood one evening atop a rebuilt tower, looking over the city bathed in golden light. She could see children playing, adults working, and survivors coordinating their efforts with skill and determination. The city was no longer a place of ruin. It was alive, vibrant, and full of possibility. She smiled quietly, knowing that the humans had not just saved lives. They had inspired a philosophy, a way of thinking, a belief in the power of choice. And though the humans were gone, their presence remained, not in structures or weapons, but in the minds and hearts of those who had survived. The survivors understood now that hope was not a gift from gods. It was the product of action, intelligence, and courage. They had been given something far greater than miracles. They had been shown how to become extraordinary themselves. For the first time in generations, Leora felt certain that the city would endure. Not because of luck, not because of divine favor, but because humans had chosen to act. Their decision had altered the course of history, and their lesson would live on forever. When all seems lost, it is action, intelligence, and determination that answer the prayers no God ever could.